Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of the Adaptable Athlete Podcast. How are you all doing out there? I hope everybody is doing great. I am wonderful. It is February. It is absolutely gorgeous out here in the window. I mean, I don't want to rub it in. Sorry if you're in the East Coast or somewhere cold, but the weather is amazing here in beautiful sunny Arizona. It is a little concerning though because it is already 80 degrees. I don't know what that is in Celsius, but it's already 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm hoping it's not too hot of a summer. It will inevitably be. So I'm just going to roll with the punches. But anyway, I hope you all are doing great. I hope February is starting off amazing for you all. For today's episode, we're going to be getting real and getting into a topic that I think we don't discuss enough as coaches. You know, we like to highlight our wins. We like to highlight the victories that we have and talk about how awesome we are. But I think what we need to do, not just as a subset of an industry, if you want to call it the movement community, coaches, whatever it may be, but we need to talk about things that we got wrong and things that we misunderstood, because a lot of people can be intimidated by learning these ideas and are afraid to make mistakes and feel like you have to be perfect as a coach. I heard somebody say to me one time, you have to make bad music before you can make good music. And I've made plenty of bad music throughout my time as a coach, and I'm still making bad music, right? It happens all the time. So I wanted to share some of the mistakes that I've made along the way around my journey. This is going to be both coaching related, but also related to ecological dynamics and modern approaches to skill acquisition and coaching. And I think this will hopefully align with anybody out there who is maybe doing this for a while and they want to reflect on how they've done and how they've grown in the past. I think that's fun. I think it's very interesting to look back at what you did 2 years ago and laugh. In fact, if you're not laughing at yourself, I don't think you're pushing your boundaries enough and growing enough, but that's just my opinion. I also think that it is also fun or unique anyway, if you're a newer coach and maybe you need to hear this, you are along your journey and you're afraid of making mistakes. And again, it's part of the process. So speaking of modern coaching, as you can see, that little orange guy right there, that is the Modern Coaches Planner. For an up close view, that is the Modern Coaches Planner. That is the planner that I've developed for coaches that is built on a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, built on my journey and what I wish I had as a young coach. So that is available. We are back in stock. The first run sold out. That is available now at thecoachhav.com. You can check that out. I'll leave a link in the show notes. You know, if you have any questions about it, feel free to reach out. But it's been well received so far. And thank you for everyone for the support. So before we get into today's episode, one last thing I want to remind you of that we're doing here at Emergence. We have our big conference coming up June 5th and 6th in Minnesota. We are going to be doing a unique topic, our debate style format that we've never done. I'm going to be one of the presenters. So if you want to hear me engage with another coach, bring in another set of views, then definitely look forward to seeing you there, as well as Sean, Rob Gray, Tyler, and there will be several practicals as well. We'll be releasing an episode that goes into that a little bit deeper soon. So I will link to that as well in the show notes. Be sure to check that out. It's going to be awesome. I'll be there and I hope to see you in Minnesota. All right. Wow. That was almost 4 minutes of intro. Let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to the episode. Enjoy today's episode, guys. All right, so let's start it off. Again, remember, today's topic is what I got wrong when I started, what I've gotten wrong along the way. And I'll do a quick background on my journey. I've mentioned now, I've been in a couple podcasts recently. I've mentioned it now a couple times publicly, but I started as everybody else did, doing what everybody else does. And that's, you know, when we're talking about movement, which is what many of us are interested in, that is movement in a very prescribed, predetermined, pre-planned way. That's because that's what I did. That's what people around me did. So it wasn't until I met Sean that someone brought a different perspective. And, you know, I was asked on a podcast with Jeff Moyer about how that journey was. And it was nonlinear, to no one's surprise. It was full of mistakes. It was full of victories and losses, but that is all part of it. And so I wanted to share that with you guys today. I'm still not a finished product. Sean himself would tell you he's not. Rob Gray, anybody who's been doing it even longer than me would tell you. But I wanted to share those with you today. So we're going to share 3 mistakes that I made along the way that hopefully can resonate with you and you can get some takeaways from them and apply to your own practice. So first takeaway is drills over principles. Again, that's drills over principles. So I, along with many, many coaches, and I actually think this is a big issue in the coaching world, is we are fascinated. We are dumbfounded. We are awestruck, whatever analogy you want to use, by drills and forget about the principles. And the thing is, the principles are at the top of the pyramid. And it's not about what drills you do, because yes, how you do drills, activities, exercises, whether it be a strengthening exercise, a certain intervention that you utilize, is very important. But far too often, coaches don't understand why they do something. And this is how we get in the world of copycat coaching. We get people that just copy things, or they vacillate back and forth from theory to theory. I see this all the time. People that say they utilize ecological dynamics, or they understand it, and I'm using that with air quotes for audio listeners here, but then they go back and forth between multiple things that contradict each other. Now, I'm not saying you have to be an acolyte and simply follow one way exclusively, but you have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And most people that go and do this dance of contradiction, they don't understand what they're doing in the first place, that it contradicts something they did previously. They don't even understand it. And that's because you followed drills, right? You followed drills, you've copied drills, and you haven't really grasped the principles. I made the very same mistake where I would see something that maybe Sean would do, or Michael Zwiefel was another one that was very open with his work that he would do, and I would do it, but I didn't necessarily know why I was doing it. And then reflecting on what I used to do, I might do something that completely contradicted that. So as a coach, what do? You need to define your principles that guide you, the principles that guide your philosophy and your coaching. What I would recommend is writing them down. Write them down and have a paragraph about it. What is your coaching code? What is the thing that is going to guide you and help you create the best environment, help you create the best interventions for your athletes? Because once you have a philosophy, once you have principles, once you have a view, it guides everything else. You can then understand the adaptation you're trying to create and how it actually applies to the athlete sport. For example, if I come in and I utilize, I don't really do drills necessarily, but if I utilize a drill that is very specific speed drill for an athlete, but I haven't considered the sport that the athlete plays, right? And that may not be what's best for the athlete. Again, I've mentioned this in the podcast before, head down like track, running 40 yards in a straight line for a 40-yard dash. What is the application for that? That is a very small use case at a very specific time. But if I base my training on that, and I haven't really understood the athlete's sport, I haven't really understood the demands that they have to do, what they actually have to do when they have to go out on that field. And that's just an example. Insert your own. But again, principles over drills, philosophies over implements, that's going to guide you to learning. I made that mistake. Learn from my mistakes so you don't repeat them. All right, now we are going to number 2, the second mistake that I made all the time. And this is going basically from the viewpoint of agility, of movement, whatever you want to think. But this is going from decontextualized to contextualized. Again, that's going from decontextualized to contextualized. That goes on the spectrum, right? So basically what I would do is what a lot of people do. I mentioned this in the last episode on this podcast, but a lot of coaches will do things out of context, right? They'll do things out of context and there's randomness there, but it does not approximate what the athlete needs to do in their sport. And so what I used to do is have a progression, because if anything that coaches love, it's progression. Tell me your progression, tell me your split, tell me your protocol. Right? It's like you go to a conference and that is what people love to talk about. The minutia, right, of do you do this on week 4 or week 5? And really, the complex system doesn't really matter. I don't know, but that's another topic. But I used to go from decontextualized to contextualized, right? So maybe I would have an athlete master, and I'm using this again with air quotes for audio listeners, master how to do a lateral cut. I want to make sure that those angles are great. There's a nice little X from their left shoulder to their right knee. It's going to look really, really pretty. Once they master that, we can start adding noise and variability. We can start contextualizing, have a person there. Maybe instead I'll have them apply this in some sort of activity, right, where they have to cut and avoid somebody. The problem with that is that those are two different skills, the decontextualized one and the contextualized one. And so perhaps there are times where you want to do something that's decontextualized, especially if it's a lower level athlete. But to do this with a higher level athlete or an athlete who has moved a lot, it doesn't make sense to me. And I'm actually going to go back on what I just said, because I don't really think that there's a need for it. I think you can always create some context and utilize some context with anything. And this is where this idea that is critical to understanding modern skill acquisition and coaching concepts is key. And this is the idea of scaling information down, scaling complexity down to where athletes don't ever really need to go decontextualize. Right? There might be some scenarios where you're limited with resources as a coach, but in general, there are almost always multiple ways to scale things down by reducing the number of opponents, by reducing the velocity of the exercise via spacing. Spacing is a big one. By reducing the options for the athlete as various movement solutions, minimizing that. There are many ways that you actually don't need to go from progression to progression. Like I've seen people do this where they might have them cut out a foam roll or a cone or whatever before live people. What is it about a live person that we think we have to gatekeep that athlete from that? What is it about one person moving at ownership speed that is so different and more complex than a flashing light or someone throwing a foam roll on the ground? I just don't see it, but for some reason we think that. You see this a lot in physical therapy protocols where you will have someone facing opposition till late stage rehab, but yet they'll do high velocity cuts. They'll do T-testing, all these high velocity cuts that are maybe on commands or high volume plyometrics, and we actually somehow think that that opposition is more intense than them doing all of that. And it doesn't make sense. And that's because people don't understand this idea of scaling. Scaling, you can bring the intensity down. The problem is coaches only see dead drills, decontextualized drills, and a live competition. But there's a whole lot of in-between. And the in-between is where the gold's at. When we think about even scaling and creating an activity for our athletes, we probably don't want them to be at a super high intensity anyway, because when you're at a super high intensity, you're unlikely to be creative, or you're just going to revert to what you've always done. So bring that intensity down, allow that exploration, which you hear me say all the time, and understand that you can do something that is even really, really low. That's pretty damn contextualized. Something that's mirroring with one person. How hard is that at a low speed? I've done that with people coming off of ACL injuries, ankle injuries, and they've done great. And in my opinion, it speeds up that process, because instead of going 100 miles an hour, cutting out a cone and having to then relearn how to attune to somebody's body kinematics, you can make that process shorter. It's kind of like, I've had Scott Seavright on this podcast, and he's talked about sparring, right? They spar from day one, and people are like, oh my God, you spar. Well, you spar in a controlled way, so that way people learn to make these connections, learn to attune to certain information. Yes, it's scaled down. You can't punch somebody in the head, but instead, the other way people do is they have them hit a heavy bag till they develop all this power, all this rigidity, and then they go ahead and apply that in a full go context setting, which is more dangerous. Not even close. So again, I made that mistake all the time. I went from decontextualized to contextualized, and you don't need to. Scale the information down, reduce the space, reduce the number of bodies, reduce the options, then open up those movement possibilities, right? Open up the athletes, open up the speed, open up the space, especially if you're moving with high-level athletes where their ability to deal with complex problems is critical, and the differentiator between them being great, between them getting a contract and them not getting a contract. So again, contextualize, but scale it down. Okay, the last mistake, well, let's be honest, there was many more than that, but the last one that we'll touch on for today is this idea of allowing your athletes to own the process. And that was something I made many mistakes on, and I still see it. That's something that I, to pat myself on the back, I'm doing that right now for my audio listeners here. To pat myself on the back, I've made a significant change on. And what I mean by that, primarily for me, it came in a form of feedback. Most of us as coaches think that we are the ones that are the holders of knowledge, right? We are the ones that are telling our athletes how to move. And I certainly did that. Telling our athletes, inundating them with feedback, right? Being the person that knows. And to be honest, there was a lot of ego there for me. And there's a lot of ego there currently with a lot of coaches where they don't allow their athletes to own the process. For me, when an athlete gave me a suggestion, back then I probably blew it off. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. I'm the coach. But now I love it. because that athlete's suggestion is oftentimes how I come up with new things. I've been doing this a while. Sometimes my creativity wanes, but having someone look at it with fresh eyes sometimes is all the difference. Extend that to your staff too. If you're a coach and you have staff, even if they don't necessarily understand the principles, sometimes they might tell you stuff and it might not work. It might be BS. But they can tell you something with fresh eyes and they can look at the problem differently. So for me, it came in the form of accepting that feedback as a positive. Tyler says all the time, invite your athletes to their own party. That's kind of the next step, is soliciting that guidance and advice from your athletes, whether it be at the beginning, especially at the end. I find it very valuable. You can ask them if it was relevant for them. Was this activity relevant for you? If not, how could we make it more relevant? How could we make it more complex? Even if it was relevant, you want to hear how they could make it more complex. Because remember, you might think you know everything, but your athletes are the ones that are experiencing the sport. This comes down to this idea of knowledge of versus knowledge about, right? It's like I might have knowledge in a way of a coach, right? I might know something, but I do not necessarily have the experiential knowledge that an athlete has, and that is invaluable. Why would you throw that resource away? So for coaches, again, I made this so many times. Don't be the one that has all the answers, because you don't. Instead, look to your athletes for answers too. They can provide you information that you will never know, that you can never experience, because they are the one, right, that's going out there and participating. They are the one that has that experience that you don't. Even if you did play the sport at a high level, they're experiencing it now, and they are them, right? No one knows themselves better than athletes. All right, guys, that is it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and I have been enjoying this style of podcast. It's part diary for me, part expression, because I think one of the things that I'm really passionate about is making these ideas as approachable as possible, and also connecting with people who maybe aren't sure, because I've seen too many coaches get bogged down by being afraid to make mistakes, and by, maybe having someone being critical about how they're doing something. And I think we do need to ease that barrier, so that way more people can embrace these modern coaching principles and really start utilizing them in their own setting. So hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we will see you next time.